There is a moment in every person's life when the walls they built around themselves finally come down, not because of an earthquake, not because of a storm, but because someone who truly loves them walks up quietly, places a hand on those walls, and says, "It's okay, you don't have to hold this alone anymore." For Kate, that moment came on an ordinary Tuesday morning. No cameras, no crowds, no royal schedule. Just William, standing in the doorway of their private sitting room, holding a folded piece of paper with both hands, the way you hold something fragile, something that has taken a long time to finally be put into words. She looked at him. He looked at her. And the truth that he had carried quietly for years finally stepped into the light between them. What happened next is not the kind of story that gets told at formal dinners or written in official statements. It is the kind of story that lives in the private corners of a marriage, honest, painful, and more beautiful than anything rehearsed. This is that story. Kate was already awake before the sun finished rising. That was not unusual for her. She had always been an early riser long before the world expected it of her, long before the title and the duties and the carefully arranged mornings. She sat by the window of their private sitting room with a cup of tea that had already gone lukewarm, staring out at the garden below where the trees were just beginning to catch the early September light. She had not slept well. That was also not unusual lately. Something had been sitting between her and William for the past several weeks. Not an argument, not a coldness, but something quieter and harder to name. A kind of distance that does not announce itself loudly but simply settles in, the way fog settles over a field before anyone notices it has arrived. She heard his footsteps in the hallway. She always recognized them. There was something particular about the way William walked, a steadiness that had always felt reassuring to her, even in the earliest days when everything between them was still uncertain and full of questions neither of them knew how to answer yet. But this morning, his footsteps paused outside the door for a moment longer than usual. That pause, brief as it was, made her set down the lukewarm tea and turn toward the door before it had even opened. He came in quietly. He was already dressed, which surprised her because it was barely 6:30. He had something in his hand, a folded piece of paper, held carefully with both hands, not casually the way you carry a grocery list or a printed email, but deliberately, the way you carry something you have thought about for a very long time. He did not say good morning right away. He stood in the doorway for just a second, the early light coming through the window catching the side of his face, and Kate felt something shift in the room. The way the air changes before a storm rolls in, not threatening exactly, but charged, significant, full of something that has not yet been named. He sat down across from her, not beside her, which was his usual habit, but across from her, as if he needed to be able to see her face clearly when whatever he had come to say finally came out. He placed the folded paper on the small table between them and rested his hands flat beside it, palms down, the way someone does when they are trying to keep themselves steady. Kate looked at the paper. She looked at him. She waited. He said he had been trying to write this for 3 weeks. He said he had started 4 different times and thrown each draft away because nothing he wrote felt honest enough, or clear enough, or worthy of what he actually wanted to say. He said he had finally decided that maybe the right thing was not to write it perfectly, but to write it truthfully, and that the two things were not always the same. Kate did not move. She kept her eyes on his face, the way she had learned to do over the years they had spent together, reading the language beneath the language, the thing behind the thing. He picked up the paper and unfolded it slowly. He smoothed it against his knee with the flat of his hand. He looked down at it for a moment, then looked up at her, and what she saw in his face was not the William of press appearances or public duties or formal occasions. It was the William she had first met at university, young and uncertain, and trying very hard to be brave in the way that only people who are genuinely afraid can manage to be brave. She felt something loosen in her chest without fully understanding why. He began to read. His voice was quiet and even, but she could hear the effort behind the evenness, the deliberate steadiness of someone who has decided to say a hard thing and will not allow themselves to stop partway through. He told her that there had been a period during the past year, a period she had noticed, but that neither of them had spoken about directly, when he had not been fully present in their marriage. Not in the way people usually mean when they say something like that, not in terms of time or physical absence, but in terms of the kind of presence that actually matters. The kind where your heart is honestly in the room with the person you love, not somewhere else, not behind some wall you built for your own protection. He said he had been carrying something that he had not known how to bring to her, Not a secret in the way the word usually sounds, not something dramatic or hidden with intention, but a fear. A quiet, persistent, exhausting fear that had been sitting in the back of everything he did and said for months, maybe longer. He said the fear was this, that somewhere in the middle of everything, the responsibilities, the expectations, the weight of a life that was never going to be simply theirs in the way most people's lives could be simply theirs, he had started to wonder whether he was truly the person she deserved, whether the version of himself that he could offer her was genuinely enough. Not a royal question, not a public question, a private, human, deeply personal question that he had been too afraid to ask out loud because asking it out loud would mean having to hear the answer. Kate listened to all of this without interrupting. She was very still. Outside the window, the garden was fully lit now, the trees bright and ordinary in the morning sunshine. Inside, the room felt like it was holding its breath. She noticed that her hands, which had been resting in her lap, had at some point come together and were pressing against each other, not in distress exactly, but in the way hands press together when a person is trying to keep themselves from reaching out before it is the right moment to reach out. He finished reading. He folded the paper again slowly and set it back on the table. He looked at her and said nothing more. He had said the thing. It was in the room now, real and specific and quiet, not an argument and not an accusation and not a confession of anything dramatic. Just the truth of a man who had been carrying more weight than she had fully realized, and who had finally decided that carrying it alone was not something he could keep doing. She did not speak right away. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she looked down at the folded paper on the table between them, and something happened inside her that she had not expected. It started somewhere behind her eyes, a warmth, a sting, the physical sensation of something that has been held back for a very long time beginning to move. She pressed her lips together and breathed in carefully through her nose. She had always been careful about this in her life, careful not to let things overflow in the wrong moments, not to make a difficulty larger than it needed to be by responding to it with more emotion than the moment could hold. But this was not the wrong moment. This was, in fact, exactly the right one. She felt the tears come before she could decide whether to allow them. That was how she knew they were the honest kind, the kind that do not ask permission. They came quietly, not dramatically, just a warmth at the edges of her eyes and then a slow overflow that she did not try to stop. She reached up and touched her own face briefly, almost as if surprised, and then she looked back at William. He was watching her with an expression she had seen only a handful of times in all the years she had known him. Open in a way that his face was not always permitted to be open. Unguarded in the precise way that the life they lived so rarely allowed either of them to be unguarded. She reached across the table and covered his hands with hers. She did not do it the way you reach for someone who needs saving. She did it the way you reach for someone who has just done something genuinely courageous, and you want them to know you saw it. She held his hands, and she said, simply, that she had been afraid of exactly the same thing. That there had been days, she named them honestly, the way he had been honest, where she had wondered the same questions he had wondered, felt the same distance he had felt, carried the same fear that the gap between who they were when no one was watching and the versions of themselves the world expected them to be had been growing in ways that frightened her. She said she had not brought it to him because she had not wanted to add to what she could see he was already carrying. And she said, and this was the part where her voice went quiet, that maybe both of them protecting each other from their own fears had accidentally created the very distance both of them were afraid of. William looked at her, and his face did something that it almost never did in any of the photographs, in any of the official moments, in any of the public appearances they had made together over so many years. It broke open. Not in a painful way, not shattered, but opened, the way a window opens on the first truly warm day of spring, not because it has been forced, but because the season has simply arrived and the room needs the air. He pressed her hands between his and he breathed in, and he did not say anything for a long moment, and that silence between them was not empty. It was full of everything they had both just admitted, full of the relief that comes when two people who love each other finally stop being careful around each other and start being honest instead. They sat there like that for a while, the tea completely cold, the morning fully arrived outside the window, the house beginning its usual sounds around them. Neither of them moved to start the day. Neither of them reached for a phone or looked toward a door. They stayed exactly where they were, his hands in hers, the folded paper between them on the table. That piece of paper that had taken him 3 weeks to write and 3 minutes to read aloud, and that had somehow done what years of being careful and measured and considerate had not quite managed to do. It had gotten them back to each other. Later that afternoon, someone on the staff who brought in a tray of lunch noticed that the two of them were together in the sitting room, not working, not on calls, not reviewing schedules or preparing for an appearance, just sitting close together on the sofa the way they had not sat for a long time, speaking quietly, occasionally laughing at something, the ease between them palpable and real in the way that ease only is when it has been earned. The staff member set down the tray and left without saying anything, which was the right thing to do. The children came home from school that afternoon to find both their parents in the kitchen, cooking something badly, as it turned out, because neither of them had been paying very close attention to the timer. And the three children stood in the doorway for a moment looking at the scene with the particular suspicion that children reserve for moments when adults are clearly in an unusually good mood for reasons that have not been explained. But children are also very quick to accept good moods when they find them, and within minutes all five of them were in the kitchen together, fixing the overcooked disaster, and the sound of that house in the late afternoon, the ordinary, irreplaceable, beautiful sound of it, was the kind of sound that neither William nor Kate would have traded for anything in the world. What William had revealed that morning was not something that would ever make the news. It was not something that would be reported or analyzed or photographed. It was a private truth between two private people who happened to live a very public life, and the privacy of it was exactly what gave it its power. He had told her that he was afraid of not being enough. She had told him she had been afraid of the same thing. And in the telling, in the courage of the telling, something between them had shifted back into alignment, the way a door that has been slightly off its hinges shifts back when someone finally takes the time to adjust it properly. Not broken, not dramatically repaired, simply put right. That night, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, and the day had run its full length from the pale early morning to the deep dark of a September evening, Kate sat for a few minutes by the window again. The same window, the same chair. A fresh cup of tea this time that she actually managed to drink while it was still warm. She thought about the morning. She thought about his face when he read the words he had written. She thought about the particular relief of honesty. How strange it was that the thing most feared was almost always the thing that, once spoken, turned out to be the beginning of something better rather than the end of something good. She thought about all the years behind them and all the years still ahead. She thought about the life they had built together, imperfect, pressured, public, and also genuinely theirs in the ways that mattered. She thought about the children down the hall and the person in the next room and the piece of folded paper still sitting on the table in the sitting room. And she felt something settle in her chest, not the restlessness of the past weeks, not the vague, unnamed distance, but something quieter and more solid than either of those things. Something that felt, in the most honest sense of the word, like peace. Outside, the garden was dark and still. The September air was cooling. Inside, the house held everything it was supposed to hold: a family, a marriage, a life built on the kind of love that is not always easy and is not always smooth and is not always the version of love that looks right in a photograph, but that is real in the way that only the honest things are ever truly real. Kate finished her tea. She turned off the light. She went to find William. And whatever was said between them after that, in the quiet dark of an ordinary evening, belonged only to them.